can we trust him? Now that question is often asked in many books, movies, TV shows. Can we trust him? You see, someone needs help, but when help is offered, they don't know if he's trustworthy. And sometimes he may look trustworthy, and sometimes the person may not look trustworthy, but you don't know if you can. And so the tension builds as everyone looks around at each other, wondering, can we trust him? And then, often there's the response, well, what other choice do we have? And so they go, and then as the story continues, you find out that the person could or couldn't be trusted. Either he came through for them, or he betrayed them, or abandoned them, or just flat out wasn't able to do what he needed to do to help them. So let me ask you a question this morning. Can we trust Jesus? Yes. Absolutely, yes. And we should. Our passage today is a series of miracles that demonstrate that Jesus is capable and good. And it encourages us to have faith, to trust Jesus. So we begin this morning in chapter 8, Luke chapter 8, verse 22. One day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. So one day, in the midst of all of his ministry activities, Jesus is by the lake of Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. And as he's there, he decides to cross the lake with his disciples. He's probably going to get some rest because he's obviously tired, given that he falls asleep in the boat. But as he sleeps in the boat, a storm comes upon the lake. Now, this lake was notorious for just sudden storms because they would come out of nowhere, because the lake was set at the bottom of a valley with hills running up from each side. And the cool air would rush down those hills, those steep hills, and then mix with the warm air over the water and storm. But this was a big one. And it's so bad that the boat is filling with water. They were in danger of sinking. The disciples aren't getting scared for no reason here. All right, this is a real danger. But Jesus is sleeping. Now, we're told that the boat was filling with water. So he's probably, as he's laying there sleeping, probably getting all wet. But he's sleeping. You see, Jesus is at perfect peace. Look at verse 24. And they, the disciples, went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. He said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" So the disciples are in a panic, and they wake Jesus up, saying, "We're dying." In Matthew's account of this event, the disciples say, "Save us." And in Mark, they ask, "Don't you care that we're dying?" So they are terrified, and they're like, "Jesus, don't you care that we're about to die?" Now, I assume all of these things were all just said in the chaos, quickly. "Save us, we're dying, help us, don't you care?" But it's a chaotic scene, and the disciples are scared, and they're desperate. Now, the thing that we need to understand or remember is that these are professional fishermen. They know how to handle a boat, but they're really afraid. So it's bad. Now, we don't know what exactly the disciples are expecting Jesus to do. I mean, maybe they're just wanting him to wake up and start helping bail water out of the boat or something. We don't know. But it's clear from their reaction that they did not expect him to do what he did. They weren't looking for a miracle here. But Jesus woke up, he rebuked the storm, and the storm stopped. Everything was perfectly calm. Now, this was a stunning and immediate change. It went from total chaos to calm. It went from great danger to totally safe. And then, after rebuking the storm, Jesus turns and rebukes the disciples and challenges his disciples. He asks them, "Where is your faith?" In other words, you should have faith. You should have had faith in this situation. In other words, they should trust Jesus and know that he is able to take care of them. Now, I don't think that Jesus expected them to casually walk up over to him and nudge him and say, "Pardon me, Jesus, but we seem to be in danger." I mean, Jesus understands the gravity of the situation, but faith is greater than fear. Faith calms fears. But after Jesus calms the storm, the disciples just sit there stunned, amazed, and afraid. But now they're afraid for a different reason. They were afraid of the storm. Now they're afraid for a different reason. They just saw the power of God at work. And Jesus was wielding it. You see, only God, the Creator, can control creation. Only the Creator has the power over creation. And they're beginning to realize that Jesus is even more than they understood. And they ask, who then is this? Who is he? And the question is left unanswered here. But only God can control the wind and waves. But this miracle shows us that Jesus has power and authority over nature. So, Christian, have faith. Jesus has power and authority over nature and the physical world. We can trust Jesus. Now, sometimes it may seem to you that God is silent, or that Jesus is sleeping in the boat while the storms of life are blowing all around you. But by faith, you know that he is with you, and you can trust him. Now, right after the storm, Jesus performs another miracle. Look at verse 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee, on the other side of the lake. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. So when they get to the other side of the lake, they come to shore, and in an area where Gentiles live, non-Jews live. And as soon as they get out of the boat, this man runs up to Jesus. The man is from the city there, but he hasn't lived at home for a long time because he prefers the graveyard. So he sleeps among the graves, and he doesn't wear clothes. Now, why does he live this antisocial and deranged life? Well, because he is possessed by multiple demons. And they have thrown his life into chaos. Verse 28. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. And so we learn a little bit more about this man and his behavior and his torment. And we're told that the demon seizes him. This suggests that either they came and went repeatedly, or that at certain times they would exert their control over him. But the man is clearly out of control, and his life is a mess. He is enslaved by these demons. Also, we're told that the people of the town had tried to restrain him, but couldn't. They had locked him up and kept watch over him, but he would just break the chains and shackles and would run away. See, the demons were very strong, and they gave this man great strength. But when the man sees Jesus, he's under control of the demon, and he runs right over to Jesus. And he falls down before Jesus, and he begs Jesus to leave them alone. You see, Jesus had told the demon to come out of the man. And this powerful demon immediately recognized that Jesus had more power and authority than he himself had. He knows that Jesus can do whatever he wants to him. And so he asks, "What have you to do with me?" Or basically, "Why are you bothering me? Leave me alone." This demon is strong, but he is in the presence of one who is stronger. He knows who Jesus is, and he knows of Jesus' relationship to God. He's the Son of the Most High God. The demon knows that Jesus has all power and authority over the spiritual realm. Verse 30. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now at this point, Jesus asked the demon's name. What is his name? And some have suggested that a person doing an exorcism could gain power or control over a demon by knowing his name. But that's not what's happening here. Jesus already has control. He's already in control. And we've seen before, he has cast out demons simply by saying, "Get out." It's possible. The reason Jesus asked this question, "What is your name?" It's possible that Jesus is asking in order to let his disciples know the extent of this man's situation, just how bad it really is. The man is possessed by many demons. And so the demon answers, "Legion." And the word legion, it's not actually a name, it's a description. Legion is used in different ways. It's not an exact number, but it refers to a very large number. A Roman legion in the army was made up of 1,000 men. So a legion refers to at least 1,000 men. It could, or 1,000, but it could refer to even more. The point is, there are a lot of demons there. And they are still begging Jesus to take it easy on them. They're afraid of him. And they don't want him to send them into the pit, the abyss, or the pit, or the place of the dead. They don't want to be imprisoned or confined and restricted. But they know that that is their ultimate destiny. You see, they know their destiny. In Matthew's account of this, they ask Jesus if Jesus is there to torment them before their time. You see, they know their time is coming. They know their ultimate destiny, but they don't want it yet. But Jesus could send them there. Verse 32. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. So they begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he allows it. Why did Jesus allow it? We don't really know. He doesn't tell us. He just allowed it. It may simply be that it's not yet time for those demons' judgment, but he is freeing the man. So Jesus frees the man. And so they leave the man and they enter the pigs. The pigs go crazy and drown themselves. Now, what we see here with this situation with the pigs demonstrates several things. First, it demonstrates the great number of demons there. There were a lot. Secondly, it demonstrates the chaos and power that this man had been living under. Thirdly, it demonstrates the destructive nature of demons. Fourth, it demonstrates the comparable value of people to animals. That people have greater value than animals. Now, not that Jesus caused the death of these pigs, and I'm not saying that animals aren't valuable, they are, but Jesus was willing to let the demons go into the pigs, but delivered the man. And then fifthly, it demonstrates the cost of delivering a person from evil. But in the ultimate sense of deliverance from evil, it will take the life of Jesus. Verse 34. When the herdsmen saw that what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. The people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him, Jesus, to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. So the herdsmen saw what happened and they ran. Now, there was probably a mixture of being scared because of what they just saw and scared because they were responsible for all those animals who are now dead. And so they run and they tell everyone because it's amazing and to let people know that it wasn't their fault. And so the people who hear about it, they come to check it out. And they come and they see all the dead pigs and they hear the story again. And then they see the man sitting there by Jesus. And this confirms it. You see, they know this man. They had tried to control him, to tie him up, but couldn't. They know him, and now here he is sitting there, calm, around people, and clothed. He's in his right mind. He has clearly been changed. He's been freed from the destructive power that held him. But when they see him, they respond in fear. Now, this is not fear in the good sense of fearing God. This is not faith. But we're told that they had great fear. You see, they recognized the supernatural power and authority that was exerted by Jesus. And they want nothing to do with it. They knew the strength of the demons, and now there's an even greater power there. And that scares them. They're afraid. They're probably also afraid of further financial loss. They don't want another incident like this with the pigs. And so they ask Jesus to leave. This is the opposite of a faith response. They are turned off by Jesus rather than attracted to him. And so what does Jesus do? He leaves. Jesus doesn't force himself upon people. He doesn't stay where he's not wanted. Verse 38. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, with Jesus. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. And so the man who was delivered by Jesus wants to stay with Jesus. He believes in Jesus and he begs Jesus to let him go with him. But Jesus sends him home instead. He sends him home to be a missionary. You see, Jesus is leaving the area, but he is not leaving that area without a witness about him. Now, does this sound familiar? When Jesus, after his death and his resurrection, when he left the earth, what did he do? He left witnesses. He told his disciples to go and to be his witnesses. He commissioned his followers to tell others about him. And by the way, some are called to follow Jesus away from their home. Some are called to follow Jesus right where they're at, to stay at home. But we are all called to follow Jesus and tell others about him. You are a missionary, either here or there. So Jesus tells this man to declare how much God has done for you. And then the man does it. What's he do? We're told he tells everyone how much Jesus had done for him. He makes the connection and he understands that God did this through Jesus. And so, Christian, have faith. Jesus has power and authority over the spiritual realm. We can trust him. Well, the miracles aren't done. Let's keep reading. Verse 40. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. So we'll stop there for a second. So when Jesus gets back across the lake, back to the Israel side of the lake, Jewish side of the lake, the crowd is waiting for him there. And there's one man in particular who is anxiously awaiting Jesus' return. And this man was Jairus. Jairus was a ruler of the synagogue, so he was like the lead elder of the town. And he probably planned and ran the synagogue meetings, but he had a significant high position, and he was an important community leader. But when he comes to Jesus, he falls on his face before Jesus in humility and respect. He doesn't come with any notion of deserving Jesus' help, but he is pleading with Jesus to help. And so we see here that some Jewish religious leaders were not opposed to Jesus. We've seen a lot who were, but some are not. Jairus clearly believes that God is working through Jesus. And his daughter is dying, and he believes that Jesus can help her. Second part of verse 42 says, "And as Jesus went, the people pressed around him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. Okay, so Jesus agrees to go. But while he's on the way, he's interrupted. So we have one miracle story interrupting another miracle story. All right? So as Jesus is walking to Jairus' house, the crowd is pressing in on him. They're all bumping him. They're trying to be close to him. But in that crowd, there is a woman who is sick. She's had a discharge of blood for 12 years. In other words, she has some kind of hemorrhage, probably from her uterus, but she has had this health issue for 12 years. Now, did you catch the connection here? That's as long as the little girl has been alive. And this makes 2 points. First, she's been sick for a long time. But secondly, on the other hand, her problem is not a life and death issue. And so in a sense, this issue may get in the way of the more pressing issue. But her situation is still bad. She's seen multiple doctors, and she has spent all her money, but with no success. No one could heal her. In fact, in the book of Mark, we're told that she's been hurt by these doctors, and she is worse off now than she was. So nobody could heal her. Her situation is hopeless. But that's still not even the worst part. You see, because of the blood, she is constantly ritually unclean. That means that she can't take part in public religious activities. And she is socially cut off from people. Because if anyone touched her, they themselves would then become unclean, and so she would be avoided by others. And so this woman lived with embarrassment, and she couldn't take part in much of normal life or public worship or regular fellowship with others. In verse 44, she came up behind him, behind Jesus, and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. So she's trying to sneak up behind Jesus unnoticed. She wants to sneak up and be healed without anyone noticing her. Now, why? Why would she want to sneak in there? Well, maybe she thinks Jesus would refuse to touch her because she's unclean. Or maybe she's afraid of the crowd because she's unclean and she's right there in the middle of that big crowd. Or maybe she's just embarrassed. But what we see is that she has faith. Now, her understanding may not be exactly right, might be a little misguided or superstitious. In fact, Mark says that she was thinking, well, if I just touch the edge of his robe, then I'll be healed. Almost like it's something magical. But she believes that Jesus can heal her. She believes that God is working through him. And when she touches the edge of his clothes, Jesus immediately heals her. Verse 45. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declaring in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. So when this happens, Jesus says something that just seems ridiculous to Peter and really to anyone else. All right? He says, "Who touched me?" I mean, the crowd is all pushing in on him. There are people bumping into him from every side. And then he asks, "Who touched me?" And you're like, what? A bunch of people touched you. But then Jesus explains. He's talking about a specific touch. He explains that power went out from him. Now, this sounds strange when we read this, because it almost sounds as if power is discharged from Jesus, like power is discharged from a battery when it's connected. But that's not what's happened here. You see, Jesus knows that he has healed someone. But it's not just some mysterious magical healing that left Jesus wondering how it happened or what happened, who it was. See, I believe Jesus knew exactly what had happened and who touched him. But he wants to talk to her. He wants to have that conversation. He is giving her a chance to come to him openly. Now, the woman realizes then that he's speaking of she knows that he's speaking of a specific touch, because she knows that when she touched him, she was healed. And so she realizes that Jesus knows, and so she goes and she admits it was her, but she is scared. Again, we're not told why she's scared, but again, it could be that she doesn't know what Jesus will do, or again, that she's embarrassed or unclean in the middle of the crowd, or maybe because she's just in awe of Jesus' great power. But when she bows before him, she boldly declares or testifies in front of everyone what had happened, what Jesus had done for her. Verse 48, and he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So Jesus puts her at ease. First, he calls her daughter, which is a term of endearment. It expresses closeness, like she's family. And then he commends her faith. Your faith has made you well. It wasn't that she had perfect faith or so much faith, but she had faith. She believed in God's power and in Jesus. And now Jesus says she can go in peace. She can go knowing that she has been healed, and more importantly, she has peace with God. She has been restored to a right relationship with God. And this will also bring emotional peace as well. But this is great encouragement and comfort for this woman who has been unclean and alienated from people for 12 years. But look what happened, verse 49. While he was speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." So now back to the little girl and her situation. She was dying. Well, the delay was very costly. The woman was healed, but the little girl has died. So they tell Jairus not to take any more of Jesus' time. And when they tell him this, their statement reveals what they believe. You see, they believe that Jesus could heal, but that's it. They don't believe Jesus can raise her from the dead, because that's impossible. So she has passed beyond all help. But Jesus responds to their statement by telling Jairus not to fear, but only believe. You see, fear and faith are opposites. And Jesus is telling them, don't fear, but believe. Trust me. Jesus is telling them to trust him. Trust God's ability to make her well, no matter what. Verse 51. And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." and they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. And so we know that Jairus believed because he still takes Jesus to his house. He had faith. He trusted Jesus. But when he gets to his house, there are a lot of people there. And these people, Jesus only lets a few people go into the house with him. But the people at the house are mourning. They're mourning the death of this little girl. Now, they wouldn't come and start mourning until her death was confirmed. But Jesus tells them to stop weeping, that she's only sleeping. She's not dead, she's just sleeping. Now, why would Jesus tell them that? Well, it's because he knows what he's about to do. He knows that she will live. And really, this is a call to believe. And a reminder to Jairus, only believe. Trust me. And so the mourners, though, they just laugh at Jesus because they know she's dead and death is the end. They don't believe that she will live because people don't come back from the dead. And at this point, Jairus can be swayed by the people who are laughing at Jesus, mocking Jesus, or he can continue to trust Jesus. Verse 54. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. So Jesus takes her by the hand and wakes her up. He calls her spirit back, and he tells her to arise. Her spirit returns, and she immediately gets up. There's no recovery time. She's immediately and fully and completely healed well. And Jesus tells them to give her something to eat. Now, this emphasizes the fact that she is really alive and she's back to normal. She needs to eat something. But her parents are amazed, which is totally understandable. Because even if you believe, this is still amazing. This isn't something that this is literally something you don't see every day. Or ever. But then Jesus tells them not to tell anyone what happened. And this is interesting because the mourners knew she was dead and will now see that she is alive. But Jesus didn't say that he was going to raise her. He simply said, she's sleeping, I'm going to go wake her up, kind of thing. He's downplaying the miracle. It seems that Jesus doesn't want to make a big deal about it. But why? It appears that he doesn't want this to be the main thing that people associate with him. You see, miracles demonstrate who he is, and they demonstrate his authority and his power. But his ministry is bigger than that. See, death and illness are only symptoms of the real problem. The real problem is sin. Death and illness came as a result of sin. And Jesus came to deal with the bigger issue and to reconcile people to God. And his own death and resurrection will be the one that people need to focus on. It's his resurrection. His resurrection is the one to make a big deal about, because it will bring eternal life. But this miracle, raising this little girl, shows that Jesus has power and authority over sickness and even death. Power and authority over life and death. So, Christian, have faith. Jesus has power and authority over sickness and even death. We can trust Jesus. And not even death need to be feared by those who believe in Jesus. Because we, even if we die, we know it's not the end. And so these four miracles demonstrate that Jesus has power and authority over the physical world. He has power and authority over the spiritual world. He has power and authority over disease and even death. So Jesus has power and authority over any force that may oppose us. And we belong to him. That is a good place to be. So trust him. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you will never be hurt, or that you will never be spiritually attacked, or that you will never get sick or die. But if you are a believer in Jesus, he is with you through it all. He has power over every situation. And God's purposes will be fulfilled in your life. And even if you suffer hardship or sickness or death, you will ultimately have victory in Jesus. And you have eternal life, where there will be no sickness or pain or death. But through it all, have faith. You belong to Jesus, and you can trust him. So Jesus calls us to believe, to have faith, to trust him. And sometimes things may challenge our faith or may seem beyond hope. But there is no lack, no shortcoming in God's power. And sometimes we may ask God for help, but from our limited perspective, his help is delayed. And things even get worse. Things get more difficult, maybe even impossible. But he may have something even more amazing waiting for us. Jesus says, only believe. Our faith may not be perfect, but Jesus is perfectly trustworthy. Trust him.